We want to hear from you. So how did we get here? That's the other thing is you have to ask yourself, how did we get in this mess? So let's look at a couple of things that might have created it. What do you think this might be? We got a little carried away with leverage. We got a little easy with debt. We were loaning people to money that really weren't creditworthy. We were taking those loans and repackaging them into crazy financial instruments and guaranteeing them and reselling them on the secondary markets. We had people were talking to me when I was building the house. I had one of the guys on the construction was telling me about his mortgage, and I said, "You have what kind of loan?" He had some sort of loan that you could get without proper income. He didn't have to prove his income because he didn't have enough income to qualify for the loan. So he started out at 3% above the market rates. Well, you know, interest rates were kind of low, so he started out his mortgage at about 8 or 9%. And it stayed there for about 3 years, and then it was adjusting. He was getting ready for it. In the next 30 days, his rate was going to adjust to 12%. Now, he could afford his mortgage at 9%, 8-9% where he was, but he couldn't afford it at 12%. But he shouldn't have had a mortgage in the first place because he didn't have the income to support it. But we didn't have, our policies were such that people were given these kind of mortgages. And I've had people tell me things like, well, they wouldn't give me the loan if they didn't think I could pay the money back. It's like, no. They're going to loan you the money because they're making money. We have to take personal responsibility. I think the other thing that's going on is we have a very uneducated population, a lack of financial literacy. People don't understand how to use finance, how to understand their cash flow, how to make good basic financial decisions. We don't teach finance in high school or college unless you happen to get a business degree. And what's this guy? Well, we didn't have enough regulation. We certainly had financial instruments being sold that shouldn't have been out there in the first place. So we should have had a little, much as I don't like regulation any more than anybody else in my own business, there's times that it's appropriate. And we had things that were happening that shouldn't have really been happening at all in the financial markets. And the last one, what's this guy? Fear. When Brene King Paulson walked into Congress and they said, we must act, what happened? I mean, we had a situation where we had subprime mortgages, and so we had these assets that were going belly up quickly, losing market value every day. But then what happened when you see two people that you really have faith in the financial markets standing in front of the American public on TV going, we have to do something quickly. It creates a panic. And our financial system really doesn't work well when it's permeated with fear. We have to trust the system, and money has to flow for it to work properly. So that's kind of those combination of factors that came together, and we're still digging out from them. We're still in an extreme case of fear. I think we'll see a lot more regulation, though. So here's my cure for, or not cure, I guess my advice in all markets are my never forget rules. What do you think this one might be, based on the picture? Cash is king. Or queen, depending on your perspective. Okay. So if you know where your cash flow is coming from, then what's happening in the markets isn't very relevant to you today. So what we know is that markets over the long term do well. So we want to have a situation where we know where our cash is coming from over the next 3 to 5 to 10 years. Okay, that's the first thing. Cash is king. What do you think this guy means? Don't get carried away with debt. He's got shaky legs because he has way too much debt on his back, right? So use debt wisely. Use it to expand your business. Use it to buy a home, but don't use it for consumer credit. Do you know that 43% of Americans spend more money than they make? 43%. Pretty shocking. And where do they get that money? Well, they get it from using credit. What do you think this guy is about? He says, the markets are volatile, folks. It's a fact of life. To pretend that they aren't doesn't make any sense. The markets go up and down. We have expansions. We have recessions. We have cycles in the market. So we have to take that into consideration in our planning, in your investment design. And what does this guy say? Don't follow the herd. What was it this morning that Tom called it? Sheeples? Sheeples. Says we're all sheeples. So don't follow the herd. If you're following the herd, what are you going to do? You're going to sell low and buy high. Because that's what happens. We get into a state of fear. Everybody goes out of the market. And those people that are scared the most get out of the market too. And then what do? They lose out on the market recovery. And then when things look like they're really going well, at the height of optimism, they get back in. Do you know that the average investor generates a market return of 25% of the market? So in other words, if the markets are returning 10%, the average individual investor is generating a return of 2.5% for this very fact. They are buying the wrong thing at the wrong time. They don't have a plan, they don't have an asset allocation plan, and they're following the herd. So, it's a good way to lose a lot of money. One of the basics of what we teach is that we interface goals with investing. So the question is, what are your goals? And here's my picture for that. What I would say is that if you invest before you know your goals, you're just like building a house, putting the foundation in before you know what the house design is. Would you go out and dig a hole before you knew what the house was going to look like? Build your foundation? No. You're going to get the whole design together. You're going to know what you want it to look like, how many rooms you're going to have, and all the accoutrements, and then you're going to put the foundation in, right? Well, the same thing is true for your investments are about supporting your life. So if you know what your goals are, then you should be able to put an investment plan together to help you get there. But if you don't know what your goals are, the investment plan doesn't really work. I had a guy that was referred to me that called the other day, and I answered the phone, and first thing out of his mouth was, "What would you do if you had $100,000 today?" I'm like, first of all, who are you? And he said, "I just want to know what you do with $100,000. I said, "Well, I would have to know a lot more about you before I could tell you what to do with $100,000. But besides it being below our minimum, I need to know what your goals are. Why do you need to know that? I just want to know the hot stock of the day." Was Jim Cramer on TV every day saying the hot stock of the day? So, well, that's not really what we do. We help people put investment plans together to work within their life goals. And he's like, "Well, what do I do with my $100,000? I said, "I don't know. I think you need somebody else to help you with that." So the way we help people with that is we do something called prosperity planning, which is the interactive process of basically taking your goals and designing your investment plan to meet those goals. We look at your goals and dreams and an ideal of ideal and acceptable. In other words, what are the things that are really ideal for you to have in your life and what would be okay? Then we help you identify, inventory your assets and liabilities, understand your cash flow, and use a mathematical model to help you identify the consequences of your choices. One of the things I know about money is that we're making choices every day. You spend money probably every day, maybe even if you just buy your lunch. You make a choice of whether you work for money or not, whether you spend money, and how you invest money. And all those choices make a difference in how your life works. So the question is, are those choices moving you toward or away from your goals? Well, that means you've got to know your goals and you know what your choices are and what they're impacting. And what this process does is it helps us look at all those things. So we're going to look at an example of John and Mary Smart. John and Mary are smart. They have a plan. They're 59 and 54. They have Junior and Juniorette, and they have their golden retriever, Lucky. They have some goals. They want to live in a nice house. They want to send their kids to college. They want to have plenty of money for retirement. And they come in to see us, and we started asking them questions like, well, John and Mary, what about investment risk? And John and Mary say, investment risk? I don't want any investment risk. Are you nuts? I just want to, have a nice even portfolio. Well, John and Mary, how much do you want to save? Well, Mackey, I tell you what, I want to save as little as possible. Could you just make it as little as possible? Then just whatever the minimum amount is to reach my goals, okay? Well, John and Mary, how soon would you like to retire or be financially independent? Well, I'd like to be financially independent as soon as possible. Could you just make it as soon as possible? Well, how much money would you like in retirement? Well, they say to Andy, just make it as much as possible, okay? Could you just make it as much income as possible? I don't know how many times I've heard that one. Education. Well, how do you want to educate your kids? Well, I want them to have the best education possible. Well, what about your legacy? I want to leave them the most money possible. And what's really important? What are your dreams? So, do you think you can make a plan out of this? Not really. We have to get a little more specific, okay? Because there's just too many variables. So what we really do is